So,
Okay, let's, we have a lot to accomplish today, so let's call the meeting in order and get started.
we don't.
So. wanna
So we don't have
take the-
a quorum, yes, I
you
will
don't
do
have
that.
one? Okay.
So we can't do the minutes, but I'm gonna call roll. So we have Pat Vance and Bonnie Bennett from Chester. I don't see anyone from Clinton. Daniel Smith is here from Deep River. Thomas is not here. David Lam is here from Lyme. Linda Darcy is here from Middlefield. Nick Prevost is here from Old Saybrook. Eric Salmon is here from Westbrook. And I think that is it for official committee members. We also have Ben Lovejoy from Department of Housing, Carol Jones, First Select Woman of Deep River, Carla Lindquist from Hope Partnership.
Cheers.
And I think that's everybody. Yes, and then in the room from River Cog are Marcos Gonzalez, Kevin Armstrong, Megan Chuplis, and Eliza Lopesti. And Susie Beckman.
All right, so if we don't have a quorum, then if we get one during the meeting, we can approve the minutes at the end. There aren't any really material votes made during that one, so worst cases, we can push it to the next meeting for that and just defer it. So then, without any further ado, I will turn it over. I'm gonna start, Megan, to
Yeah,
kick off the workshop.
sure.
This is our third quarterly workshop on the regional housing needs assessment. A lot of progress been made, and I can attest, at least secondhand, I've seen it in action. I haven't done all that the folks here have been doing a lot of hard work to get us where we are today. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation. Let me see, the little bar is in my way. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So everyone online can see the presentation. Everyone in the room is good. Great. So we have in the room, and you can't see it online, but we have some posters in the room to talk about how we're going to proceed with the presentation and discussion to kind of keep us in an orderly fashion. So we're going to start with the presentation. We're going to go in pieces. I'll cover where we're at on the determination part of the methodology. And then we'll go into questions and discussion, and then we'll go on to allocation, questions and discussion, and we'll put time parameters on each of those. Actually, I have that. I'll go for a few slides. So, as I said, I'll go over where we're at so far. We'll talk determination. We'll talk about the determination data inputs and the calculations. We can discuss for, we said 15 minutes. And then we'll move into allocation, data inputs and calculation, discuss for 15 minutes. We'll talk about the next steps. We know we didn't send you all of the information in advance to read and digest, so we're not expecting to come to any final consensus at this meeting. We will send all of this to you, and you can think about it. We can talk about, you know, what we've heard, and we can come back and come to consensus at the next meeting. And then we'll leave time for questions at the end.
So the main mission is to get through everything and capture any overflow in the discussions for next time. Is that-
Exactly, yes,
Great.
correct. All right, so refresher, what is RHNA, RHNA? It's a Regional Housing Needs Assessment. It's an estimate, so we're not finding exact numbers here, although we will turn out an exact number. It's not going to be precise. It's part art and part science. So what we need to do is ask ourselves, what is reasonable for our region based on the information that we do have and the priorities that we've set for ourselves? And there's no exact right answer. We've seen all of these case studies. Everybody approaches it a little bit differently. There's commonalities, but there's no one set right way to do this. There is our right way to do this. So that's kind of the goal. Why are we doing RHNA for River Cog? The short answer is it was recommended in our adopted regional housing plan, and it's in our bylaws as a delegated task to this committee. The better answer is it's intended to help us understand how we're going to plan for the housing needs of our current and our future residents. As a refresher, again, common steps in the RHNA process and what we're going to be looking at: determination, or how many units we need; allocation, or who's gonna have to plan for these units, who gets them; and then 3, which we're not covering as a region, is the local planning, accommodation. How do they fit in the towns once they're allocated? So without further ado, starting with determination. Based on our previous discussions, we said we need to look at both the current need of existing residents and the growth need of projected future residents. So current need plus growth need equals our future need. Current need is the number of units we need to accommodate existing population. So that's current population over a household size, because we don't need to house individual people, we need to house households. Growth need is basically isolating the future population. So it's total projected population minus the current population, again, divided by household size. Sorry, my things in the way here. There we go. Okay. So when we combine these in our original formula, current need plus growth need equals future need. And if you see here, so long as we apply the same household size to both the current need and the growth need, the current population kind of cancels itself out because we're adding it to subtract it. So we end up with this: future need equals the total population over the household size. Now, we don't need a new housing unit for our total projected population because we have housing units. So we're going to subtract the existing units from our projected total future households. And we don't want a 1-for-1 match, one household for every housing unit, or I guess flip that, one housing unit for every household, because then it would be really hard for people to move. You would either need someone to sell or someone to die in order to have a house open to move into. And that's not really what we want. That drives up competition for each individual unit, which is going to drive up the price, and it's going to most disproportionately impact people at the lower end of the income scale. And that's where we're starting to get into the cost burdening issues. So this was the formula that we started with on our board at our last workshop, and we added all of these sticky notes and questions that we wanted to answer. So basically the map below the picture is just a digitized version of all the stickies, because the stickies are a little bit harder to read. So basically, total projected population, are we defining homelessness and accounting for it? Are we accounting for climate migration? Where do open jobs and job growth fit in? Household size, how are we going to measure it? Existing units, are we capturing shortage and underproduction? What about doubled up households? What about seasonal and uninhabitable units? And then vacancy, are we adding to vacancy to adjust for undercount? Is that kind of a lever that we can move up and down? Questions we're keeping for later, we're not going to discuss in the determination stage, but we will discuss them, is what do we want our community to look like in the future? And when are we breaking out the income brackets? So for each of these, we're going to go through on the following slides, each of the input categories and the questions. So we'll talk about the selected data point for the input, the source that we're using, and answering the questions that were asked. So for total projected population first, there's not an agreed upon population projection for the state. Population projections do exist, but they predate 2020, and they're showing our region in pretty substantial decline. The census does provide data on existing population. So what we can do instead is extrapolate that number to make population projections. The regional housing plan uses decennial 2020 census. That is earlier data than what is currently available. But once we agree on a methodology that we like, we can update all of the data to the most current. Right now, we're just using data that's been adopted in previous plans if we have it. We're trying to stick with the 2020 decennial census or 2020 ACS data because that's what we've used and adopted previously, and we're comparing apples to apples. So again, once we agree on a methodology, that's very easy to just switch out the data points for the most current available data. It might shift the numbers, it probably will, but the process would be the same. So given the lack of agreed upon projections, we used 3 reasonable test case scenarios where population either shrinks by 1%, grows by 1%, or grows by 2.5. Based on what we've seen, 2.5 is highly optimistic. We opted for the rest of this presentation, at least, to stick with the one in the middle. So we're just going to run numbers assuming a 1% growth model. That's an outstanding question for this group, but we'll get there. For the purposes of the presentation, 1% growth model. And you'll see right there in the box, I have what that number is. So the existing population in the 2020 decennial was 174,225. With the 1% growth, that's 175,965 people in the region. So looking at the questions that were asked, does this account for climate migration? Climate migration isn't yet included in this population projection, one, because we picked the population projection. There's not an accepted model in the state. 1% growth is higher than the existing population projections, so that might capture some of what could be climate migration, but it's also something that we can monitor. It's still early. We can see what's happening in climate migration over the next 5 and 10 years and adjust as needed. 2, is this where we look at open jobs and job growth? Adding undercount and vacancy is going to help us bolster jobs when we're looking at this model altogether. We don't know that we need to add additional units for jobs specifically. Instead, what we propose is in the allocation methodology, putting housing in closer proximity to jobs, targeting supply to where workers are needed to help fill job vacancies and grow jobs. If we are still seeing high levels of job vacancies or slow job growth, that's another thing like climate migration we can monitor and adjust. Good question, is homelessness accounted for? Yes, a homeless population count is included in these population projections from the census. It counts people receiving services from shelters, soup kitchens, and mobile food vans, as well as people living in previously identified outdoor locations and other places where people are known to sleep. So that is a positive that we have. Household size. So moving on, the national average household size is 2.5. The regional housing plan found that the actual average household size for the region is 2.37. However, it also noted that over time, the number of 1- and 2-person households is growing, and the number of larger households is conversely shrinking. The national and regional trend is for household sizes to shrink due to a few factors, a larger number of single households, smaller family sizes, and also an aging population that tends to be more 1- and 2-person households. The census measures household size as all people occupying a housing unit, regardless of that relationship, which kind of points to our question about doubled up units, right? Doubled up households. That's going to create a larger than what might be actual household size. So we opted to use a household size of 2. This is intentionally low to capture an undercount. So how will household size be measured? That was one of our questions from the workshop. Household size will be measured by adjusting the regional average household size of 2.37 down to 2. The smaller household size will be applied both to existing households in order to capture the underproduction or doubled up households, and will also be applied to future households to reflect the trend towards shrinking household size. This lower estimate creates a greater need than if we use actual household size. If we use 2.37, there would be fewer households with more people per household, so we would need fewer units to accommodate them.
And what is a doubled up household?
So we have information about, well, actually, it came up at the workshop. We understand that there are a number of households that are more than one family unit or more than one person who would otherwise have a separate home living together because they can't find separate housing or afford separate housing independently.
Would this be multi-generational?
Could
Whereas,
include
like,
that.
You've got grandparents, the children, and then grandchildren all living in one,
That could contribute to that. Mhm.
or would it just be, I'm 35 and still have a roommate?
That could be too. That could be too. Now, in that case, you would be looking at a two-person household, whereas if you're talking about, say, two 4-person families sharing a house, then that would be an 8-person household per the census, even though
Yeah.
technically they would be 2 separate families.
Megan, that's a linear relationship, right? So the difference between 2 and 2.37, if it was 2.37, then you had 15% fewer.
Yeah,
So it's
yep.
just a straight, so it'd be easy enough to, we can plug it later and it'll carry right through to the end product without a lot of analysis.
Yes,
Okay.
yep.
Yep.
And that's one of the questions that we'll get to at the end of the section is about 1, population projection, and 2, the household size. So those are things we will discuss, but for the purposes of this, we've made the assumption of a 2-person household. Existing units. So our existing unit count for the census, again, this is ACS 2020 data, American Community Survey. 82,497 units existing in the region. This is the data that we used in the regional housing plan. So again, we're using the adopted data from 2020 that we have. This can be updated along with everything else. The count includes houses, apartments, mobile homes. Sorry, I keep having to move my bar here. Mobile homes, group homes, a group of rooms or a single room that's either occupied or intended for occupancy as separate living quarters, though units must have direct access from outside the building or through a common hall in order to count. So questions, how do we capture shortage and underproduction doubled up units? We already talked about underproduction. That's going to be captured in the way we have the equation now by applying a smaller household size to the existing population before we subtract the existing units. Our seasonal units counted. Seasonal units are included in this total number of existing units as a subset of vacant units. So the group is for seasonal, recreational, or occasional use, all captured together. The region has 5,893 seasonal units, predominantly in the shoreline towns. This number is up from 5,850 in 2019. Our uninhabitable units included. American Community Survey data does not count uninhabitable units as part of its housing inventory. These are units that are not suitable for living due to severe damage, lack of essential facilities, or other conditions that make them unfit for occupancy. Vacancy. So there is no set number for a healthy vacancy rate. As we saw in our case studies, they kind of were all over the place, although we did see Lincoln Land Institute says a reasonable vacancy rate is between 4% and 8%. Chase Bank cites a range of between 5% and 10%, and our case studies showed everything from 5% to 14%. The existing vacancy rate for the region is 12.6%. However, this number includes seasonal units as vacancies. The case studies all address seasonal units by removing them from the vacant unit count. So they're saying they don't count as vacant units because they're not contributing to that flexibility in the market as a truly vacant unit would because they are owned. So if seasonal units are removed, the region's vacancy rate is 5.5%. Now, this caused some head scratching for us because we are in the healthy range. And when we started this equation, up until literally yesterday, we had the vacancy rate at 5%. And so this was kind of a head scratcher. Well, we're in the healthy range at the target we were aiming for. And we realized, well, it is towards the low end and maybe 5.5% just doesn't feel that good for us. So we thought that creating a 7.5% vacancy rate would create more flexibility, and it also sits in the middle of that healthy range. We could see what that looks like as an alternative. Oh, I should also add that this vacancy rate data is again taken from 2020. So, the housing market has gotten tighter in the last few years. When we update that vacancy rate, we may see it go down.
Can I ask a question on so the two sources is Chase Bank and the land?
And our case studies,
Okay,
yeah.
what, cause I don't see Chase Bank having a good.
No, it was kind of a,
Shoreline
I
here.
would say we have
However,
pictures.
I don't know what the methodology is, I mean,
yeah, I mean, it was more for an extra consistency
Yeah.
point. All of our case studies plus these two sources that we were able to find were all in that, 4 is lower than what I've seen, but 5 and 10 seems to be where it's at. But again, in the case studies, even as you're reading through them, they're like, we picked 7 because 7 is in the middle. And it's so that's, I guess, kind of exactly what we just did, but
does UConn do any of this, Center for Real Estate, do they do any of this research?
for vacancy rates,
Well,
possibly.
Really, within Connecticut?
Well, we have data for the state of Connecticut on their vacancy rates, but as far as what is a healthy vacancy rate, I haven't ever seen it as like, what is a specific healthy vacancy rate percentage? It is X, it's always kind of in a range, and I think that has to do with the dynamics in the housing market, right? And how there are a lot of different factors that are playing into what makes it healthy or not. I think, Don Poland and Goldman and York do a lot of housing market analysis. And I think that if we were to go forward with this methodology, having someone like Don Poland, like Goldman and York, identify for us what specifically a healthy vacancy rate might be, more than this, might be appropriate.
Again, looking at sensitivity on this, so what you're considering from going from 5.5 to 7.5, that'll flow through the model as a 2% increase in the determination.
So 2%, we'll get there for the, I have the calculations up
So
here.
for every 100, it'll be 2 more.
2% on existing, 7.5 on future, to make it all the way through at 7.5.
So we'll see what that means.
Yeah.
It'll be
Okay.
7.5 on the future, but if you did it at 5 for the future, so it's still a 2%, right? The delta. The difference between 5.5 and 7.5.
Is 2, yes,
So it would boost the future
The
number by
overall.
2% as well.
it would,
Correct.
yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny because I did it one way, Kevin did it one way, Marcos did it one way, and now you've done it a fourth way, and we all came to the same answer, which I suppose means
Yep.
we're all doing,
So it's not a hugely significant number.
Right.
I mean, it's
Right,
directionally makes it a heavier lift, but it's 2% heavier.
correct.
right,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so because healthy vacancy rate can be a range of options, we can choose a higher or a lower number, or we can have someone like Goma and York choose a higher or a lower number for us to make up for potential undercounts or overcounts in other areas of the analysis, bringing the region to a 7.5 vacancy rate, not counting the seasonal units, is a choice that we've made for this particular model to present to you, to add some flexibility. A less aggressive alternative might be to apply the current vacancy rate of 5.5 to new units only, which would maintain the status quo. The existing vacancy rates in the region should be monitored year over year as the data becomes available. So plugging those numbers in, this is what we look like. We have our total projected population of 175,967 divided by household size of 2, which gives you 87,984 units minus existing units plus vacancy. And you'll see, Michael, there that equation breakdown. We've got existing units times a 2% vacancy rate plus the future units times a 7.5% vacancy rate, which gets you a vacancy buffer of 2,061 units. You do that equation all the way across, you get a grand total for 7,548 units if we experience a 1% population growth. Ta-da.
Wow.
So outstanding questions. Do the household size and vacancy rates need to be adjusted? I guess I'll just run through the questions and then we can take them one at a time. Which population projection or projections, because we could do a range of options, should be used? And 3, should the analysis include an additional seasonal adjustment? Should it be that we're accounting for them in the vacancy rate like that? Or is there another way to deal with those units? And again, we don't need to come to a consensus on this today, but we've got 15 minutes to chat.
If we want to stick to our timeline.
We have less
that.
than. We did
ask questions during your.
Yeah, but yeah.
Sorry, I know,
We
we're not
pre-
used to this, but we have a lot to get through.
I know,
so.
we pre-discussed some of these questions, right? So,
I would also like to add that, as Megan mentioned, we don't need to come to a consensus today. We are asking everyone to come to a consensus by October 11th, so we can proceed.
yeah, so we'll send you guys home with this information. We'll have what we talked about today. You send us stuff, Eliza put it here by October 11th so that we have some time to formulate all of the things that we've heard. We'll bring it back here, we'll rehash it. And at that point, at our October meeting, we will land on, this is what we're doing so that we can do it before November. So now we have 3 minutes.
No, but I mean, definitely we should. I mean, we don't have to, just saying.
Yes, in the interest of everybody's time.
Anywhere in the calculation, do we document any of the NOAA housing?
No, it's all housing
It's all
units.
housing.
So it's
Market
all
plus
existing
support.
units.
Can we back one just so we have all your
Yeah.
calculations?
Yeah.
They were amazing.
There is a substantial brain trust in this office that put work into this.
So the 7,500 units with a 1% growth is how far are you projecting that? What is that? That's not today, if it's 1% growth.
It's a 10-year
10-year
projection
Over
yeah.
10 years.
over 10 years. Yeah, but a check-in at 5.
And that number includes the seasonals in the base.
It's
Right.
in the existing units, but it's out of the vacancies.
Okay.
Yep.
And what fraction of vacancies are seasonal? I know in
So
Old Line it's a
it
huge
was-
fraction, but I don't know how it is regional.
So overall for the region, it's a 7% difference. We went from 12.6% down to 5.5% with the seasonals removed from vacancy rate.
They're more than half of the total vacancies.
So if we kept them in the vacancy, we would be saying, well, we got too many vacant units.
Right. And by removing them, the result will go up,
Yes,
because you're starting with less.
yes.
Correct.
You capture the Airbnbs in that, are they counted as a seasonal?
So
or-
I would imagine that those would probably fall under those for occasional use, which is
Yeah.
included in seasonal.
Yeah.
Right? Cause it's basically an ownership model where the person lives elsewhere and
Okay.
it's second homes. It's investment properties. It's like anything that's not lived in.
Yeah, to be really brief, but follow up on our earlier discussion, it's striking me that the seasonals, as painful as it would be to take them out of the baseline, really belong in the accommodation phase, because they're a potential source of permanent housing
Correct.
rather than an existing source of, and the rationale for that is that they don't contain a household. And they can't contain a household without probably structural modifications and regulatory accommodations. So
Not necessarily true. Not necessarily true, because I think you're thinking of 3-season units that are not winterized. But this number also includes investment properties and second homes that are capable of being, if they sold it tomorrow, a family could move in
Could
and use
convert
it
it.
full time.
Yeah.
again, with you on that, but it's
Mhm.
still an if.
Yeah.
So if there are,
And those ifs, I think we'll probably want to address that town by town, just because of the issue of the excessive weight that it would put on towns that actually have those seasonal units, whereas towns that don't, it's a moot point.
Also, existing unit number, I could see removing 3-season units, which we could maybe get to via CAMA data on
Possibly, yeah.
possibly.
Yeah.
But also the other units do exist, so they are technically an existing unit.
Yeah.
And
So in this scenario, because we were looking at the seasonal units in a different way, where we were trying to just outright remove them. But because we can't, or haven't defined specifically which ones are livable and which aren't, we are assuming that they're all potentially convertible into a home that someone could live in. And in terms of the availability on the market, a seasonal home that can be lived in and a home that is lived in are the same factor. So whether they come up for sale, we're not determining.
Yeah, I'm not there with you on that one because because they're not existing at the time of this analysis, but let's not go down the rat hole.
Right. So rather
Pick
than
that
just,
off.
pulling them out completely and pretending that they don't exist in terms of a structure. Instead, they're just not counted from the get-go as an open property. Like they're not a vacancy like a foreclosure would be.
Right.
Or if a house was on the market or whatever, so they're not, you can't treat them as though they're available when they really are not.
Right.
No,
So I think you just argued to take them out.
So we did.
of the
So, yeah, so
vacancy.
we removed them from the vacancy, not from the total pool of available buildings.
I would debate that they're available. They could be made available, but again,
Right.
I would see that as part of
Oh, yeah, no,
accommodation
and
and not as part of determination.
I totally agree that from a logical standpoint, those structures are not available. But we're not determining, at least at this phase, or I should say at this part of the equation, whether or not that's the case. Like, we're not going seasonal by seasonal and saying this one could become a home, this one can't become a home. We're just saying the building exists. We're letting the town decide at that point. So I
We're-
definitely agree that when you get down to the town level analysis of it, that you would want to heavily weight that based on the town that has them in it. But for the regional number, we can't just say the house doesn't exist.
That wasn't the case we did, after our discussion, go back to the case study models, and that's how we came up with this vacancy approach. Because none of the other ones were removing them fully from the supply of existing.
Yeah, it's a brainer, definitely.
And I don't, even though we did come up with a posit of just applying a 7% coefficient, that still questions, okay, how did you decide that that building is allowed to become a home and that building is not allowed to
Right.
become a home? We really can't adjust it by even a fraction, because that's just taking a pot shot, I guess.
And how different is that from an underutilized commercial property that has potential for conversion to mixed use? You know,
Exactly,
that's
so, and that's where we
Or an
start
empty pool.
getting down the rabbit hole. As much
Yeah.
as we should take a lot of these use cases out of the equation, because we don't wanna have to also consider the commercial property and also consider the foreclosure, like, we're just kind of leveling the playing field, but.
I'll stop.
But I totally agree that we should come back to the seasonal question when we look at the individual towns.
And it's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on as a region, particularly in the shoreline communities. Seasonal units are going to put continuous pressure on the housing market because as as housing becomes available, with our demographic trends and our job trends, we're seeing more and more turnover in the market going towards investment and seasonal use
Yeah.
as opposed to year-round use. And those are the people that are able to afford the higher cost of our housing units. So seasonal units are going to, on the shoreline with high amenity value, continue to be something that puts tremendous pressure on the housing market, and it's something that we need to watch. We could dial up the vacancy rate even more if we wanted to, if that's something that starts to feel like an issue. But I think that 7,548 units seems a good, reasonable ballpark of what towns need to do, and we can watch and see what starts to happen as those units start coming online and make adjustments if we need to.
So that assumes we're about 160 population now. What shortage do we have now? I mean, if this
The
says we
current
need,
need.
you know, if this says we're gonna be 75-48 short
Mhm.
over 10 years, where are we now with a shortage?
So
How many
let's
units?
see. Does someone want to plug that in for me? That's not me, one of my math people. So that would be just looking at the current need. So let me see if I go back to. Current need would be current population divided by household size. If we're estimating household size of 2 minus the existing unit.
That's on that slide with all the math, it's just buried in the,
Yeah, it's in
Yeah.
there.
so it's what we have, so the strict, before you add the 2,000, it's that 5,487. That's what, if population were not to change
No,
at all.
No.
It's like, so current population, right, which is
Mhm.
like 174,500
Yeah,
Divided by 2.
divided by
Oh,
2
current,
or
okay.
2.3.
Gotcha,
divided by 2.
No.
So,
Divided by two.
okay, and then minus existing.
so minus
Minus
1,700 or
existing.
so it's
Existing units is 82,497.
497 divided by 2.
Oh, it's 4753.
That sounds right,
And that's assuming a smaller household size,
correct.
Right,
which is an intentionally, so again, the thing to think about is we've got a couple of levers moving at the same time where we're getting this estimate and we've got some choices. So things like household size, we're measuring it intentionally low to try and catch some underproduction. We have put the vacancy rates a bit higher because we know that there's a squeeze on the market right now that we're feeling, right? We're looking at a 1% population growth, which is probably generous. We're probably not gonna see a 1% population growth because Kevin, do you recall what you were seeing for the trend?
Yeah,
It was not
they're-
pretty.
Unfortunately, they were old projections, from various organizations through the state. Done in 2017, so this is pre-pandemic, before that kind of changed up the whole game. But on the order of 5 to 15% in the decrease across all of our towns. So not numbers that we optimistically would like to work from, but could be reality.
Consistent with what Poland was saying.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was really sort of
Just-
stark.
Just on the,
Exactly.
on the 1 year, you're looking at an average of 1 to 3 in the negative.
That was brought up during the last P and Z.
Mhm.
A citizen made a comment like, well, our numbers are so whatever, I should move. And I'm like, well, I've seen all the numbers. We're actually in a pretty sweet spot.
It's moving that way, and yeah, I don't think even when you try to factor in immigration and other things, it's just that the math is overwhelmingly pointing downward.
We still
So,
have to remember that if you did the waterfall on us, we're starting out 5,000 in the hole.
right,
Correct,
Right.
So
yeah,
the net growth is,
right.
yes, any form of growth is gonna add on top to a problem that already exists.
Right, exactly.
Well, if it's 2.37 currently, then in fact, that 5,000 is high. Because you're dividing it by 2.
Right.
With the idea that that's where we're going, but if you're looking at the
Right.
current,
Yeah,
it's probably more like 4.
Right, right. We're assuming that there are households that are not being accounted for in this
Mhm.
estimate of 2.37. That there are more people living in a household than would choose to if they had their own unit available that they could afford. So again, these are things to mull over. We don't have to come to a consensus, but these are the outstanding questions, and we're gonna have to figure out the right balance of the levers. Now, the good news is that this number that we spit out is very consistent with the numbers that Don projected for us when he did our housing market study. So, yeah, that housing market study was done in 2022. It's a bit old. It was using 2020 data. But it is at least consistent with that. So we're not far out of the ballpark here. We're circling in on the target, I think. But yeah.
And that was another reason for doing a negative and a couple of positives, just to see what the spread of options were. And when you go negative, the numbers don't make sense. It says that to keep up with your housing needs, you should start bulldozing.
Yeah,
So,
Too many.
and if we're looking at that, the way the housing market is now and people are trying to buy and can't buy, we know that that's not right. That the answer is not start bulldozing.
right, so,
So one other question for you though is that I kind of, what just really struck me about Poland's presentation, which I thought was phenomenal, is that we're really not building houses anymore.
Right.
And these units, whatever they might be, are not what we think of as structures for a family of four.
Right. right,
So I think that's the other piece of it that we haven't really addressed, and we say there's 400 or 7,500 units we need.
Mhm.
What are we talking about? Multifamily?
Right.
And then therefore, are we talking about fewer developments?
Right.
Versus
right,
ticky-tacky houses all in a row?
yeah, what's the mix?
That's right.
Yeah, and that, we can, at the regional level, we can look at and make recommendations. Dawn did in our housing market study, make suggestions about the mix of what those units should look like. We can do that at the regional level, but we would hesitate to get too involved with how the towns are
Sure.
planning
Right.
Sure,
for their units.
but I thought that his demographic presentation was really something that we all have to think about
Yeah.
differently when we're looking at this.
Absolutely,
And that's the next stage. We haven't done that step yet, is actually taking the final figures and then breaking them down by those demographics to say, how many do you need at, say, 70% AMI, 80, 100, just to give you an idea of, okay, who needs to afford what, where?
I'm not just talking AMI, I'm talking about size, unit size.
Right. But it does
AMI, yes. but
correlate
also-
to some degree,
Do they?
Oh,
can,
yeah, they can, because yeah, if a housing, like a single family home, your standard single, like one level, single family home is gonna command a certain price. We know how much that now is. Can that family reasonably afford it?
so, okay. I think we've got a lot to chew on,
Mhm.
and Kevin has some awesome maps coming up. So I'm gonna move to allocation.
Moving right along.
Timekeeper,
I
sorry.
need to give you, we need to get the gavel out.
I know.
All right, so allocation, where we started, and I brought back, you'll see in pink dot, what do we want our community to look like in the future? So fortunately, we have an adopted regional housing plan. The regional housing needs assessment allocation portion is really a question about how the region wants to accommodate growth. And that is, the way the units are allocated across the region is going to speak to the region and by extension, the municipality's vision and priorities for how they want the region to grow. The Regional Plan of Conservation and Development was adopted by the River Cog Board in 2021. It serves as a blueprint. It was brought into the Regional Housing Plan. This is the map that came out of it. The vision focuses on concentrating physical and economic development in what we called activity centers, which are envisioned as vibrant destinations where civic, residential, commercial, and employment uses can be integrated. Basically, what we did was we looked at where the stuff is and said, that's where more stuff should be. And we leave the open space open and try and keep as much natural environment and resources preserved as possible. So based on the objectives of the regional housing plan, this was the formula that, and I guess I should say, the regional housing plan objectives and also our case study commonalities. This was the formula that we started with. I'll run through these super quick. Diversify the region's population in terms of age, race, and socioeconomic status. Create a resilient workforce. Ensure that people who work in the region can live near their jobs. Diversify housing stock for all household types. Examine ways to make existing housing stock, office and retail space functional for a changing population. Encourage orderly creation of housing of different styles and types near existing areas of development, employment, and transit. So based on this, we prioritize distributing future need based on population growth, transit, and jobs, adjusted by buildable land and also equity to make sure that we're providing opportunity across the region at all income levels. So that's what we brought into workshop 2. And we had some comments and questions that, just like with determination, we have digitized here. So with transit, are we looking at bus stops and rail stations? For jobs, we actually broke off into activity clusters, which included amenities, services, access, something akin to an urban growth boundary, as well as jobs. We talked about group quarters, infrastructure, again, homelessness, which we've already covered, and then equity, that includes existing share of units in different income categories. So we'll go through kind of the same process as we did for determination. Our first input was population growth. Initially, we wanted to do population growth and allocate a percentage of units based on each municipality's projected growth. However, again, there's no agreed upon projection, and most of the projections are really negative, which would mean we would have negative allocations for population growth to municipalities, which really doesn't make a lot of sense based on what we're trying to do. The goal is to acknowledge that every municipality needs some housing. There is some existing need. So instead, we decided to use the existing share of the region's population in relation to the whole region. For transit, co-locating housing in transit was an objective of the housing plan. In the case studies, we saw examples of transit allocation divided into rail and rapid bus. We have Shoreline East stations. We don't really have rapid bus routes. I don't think you could classify any of our bus routes as rapid. The Middletown bus terminal, however, is uniquely positioned to accommodate TOD. It's included in our regional TOD study that we're working on right now. So for that reason, we selected those 4 locations, Middletown Bus Terminal and the 3 Shoreline East stations for our transit allocation. Jobs. So the objective of the regional housing plan, we're focused on providing better access and opportunity for workers to live near their jobs. That also came up when we were looking at determination, and we said we'd look at it here. Here it is. We collected jobs data as part of our comprehensive economic development strategy. We used, I don't remember what LEHD stood for. It is census data that powers on the map. It's LEHD origin, destination, employment statistics to identify job locations and commuter patterns. So we also use this data in the allocation to determine where the concentrations of jobs were in the region so that we could see how we could provide housing with better access to jobs.
What year was that? Is that 2020 as well?
Yes, 2020. Yeah.
Thank you.
However, at the workshop, it became clear that jobs wasn't the only priority for the group because we saw that activity cluster happening. So jobs became a subcategory of, instead of activity cluster, activity centers, because that's a nice synergy with the language that we use in our plan of conservation and development. So to jobs, we added services and amenities, which we used from the SEDS. We did an analysis of critical businesses that had grocery stores and healthcare facilities. That was created using the Connecticut Business Inventory Master List from CT Data. We combined those critical businesses with civic institutions, schools, attractions, town centers. This was all data that we compiled for our plan of conservation and development and also our SEDS. So you're seeing a pattern. We're trying to use data that we have used in previously adopted plans for consistency purposes. We also added an infrastructure layer. Originally, this was under the buildable land category, but it became really apparent that sewer and water was going to be really important to identifying where the stuff could be. Where is a lot of stuff? Where can stuff be? So we had created a sewer and water infrastructure map as part of our plan of conservation and development using, you can correct me on this, Kevin, it was Department of Health data and town data, right?
Yep.
And we updated that at some point between then and this effort. So that was included as well. We took out buildable land. I'm sorry, that looks really aggressive. It was removed because what we found when we were looking at this is we were selecting the areas where the stuff was, and then when we looked at buildable land, we were identifying the areas where the stuff wasn't, and so we were kind of looking at two sides of the same coin. So instead of deselecting non-buildable land, we selected for land that was built. So that became the basis of this, but it's an open conversation. That's just what we did for this exercise. And then, municipalities with less buildable land are already seeing a smaller total allocation because their municipalities are not where the stuff is, where the sewer and water is, where the job development is, and so on and so forth. So then it would be incumbent on municipalities to make sure that the regulations are directing the growth towards the buildable land and away from the non-buildable land. And then equity, we opted to use CHAS data, Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data, that's a custom tabulation of American Community Survey data that's done for HUD. It breaks down allocations by municipality and for the region into 30%, 50%, 80%, and 100% AMI. And what we were looking at doing, and we haven't done the exercise yet, is looking at applying the regional breakdown to the town breakdown of AMI. So a town that has a much lower share of AMI at 30% is going to get a higher allocation share of housing at 30%, and vice versa. If a municipality has a much higher than average share of housing at 100% AMI, then they would get a lower allocation of that. So it kind of redistribute some of the AMI categories consistent with the regional average, which is really similar to the state averages I checked.
Yeah, and that doesn't change your allocation. That's not saying, well, you don't have enough of this house, and that tends to be where the affordable housing conversation goes. You don't have enough, you didn't reach your 10%. This is just saying to your question, what kind of housing do we need?
Yeah.
It's trying to answer that question.
So it's going into, it's shuffling your allocation in terms of category, but it's not adding to or taking away from the allocation base number, if that makes sense. So your pie is still the same, but your slices may change.
But it might give you a little bit of argument onto, do we need an apartment building or do we need a small section of one-family homes?
Could you flip up the map again, where Willis was put together?
How about this one?
Yeah.
This is the new one. So this is everything put together. We made some weight decisions, and that's gonna be a question for you guys that we can talk about. We gave half of the allocation based on population. So half of that, I should have put that number up top, the 7,000 whatnot units. 50% of that would be distributed based on share of population by proportion. The transit, there's only 4 places. We gave it a very small percentage allocation because we don't want to overburden those 4 municipalities, especially because those 4 municipalities are also going to be heavily impacted by the activity centers. We gave 40% allocation to places where job services and amenities and sewer and water are. And the population is kind of the equalizer. The population is the one that says everyone needs something. So even if you don't get a share or a large share in transit or activity center, you need to provide some housing for your existing need. And those are probably going to be the smallest allocation numbers.
But don't you find that the larger population centers also have the transit, also have the
Yes.
activity?
Yeah, and the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So these sort of all wash out.
And population growth.
They do
Yeah.
pile on. They do. So the ones that you'll see, you'll see.
Yep.
Is transit even something we should consider in our region,
So I think,
given the fact that we don't really have much public?
so the reason we did transit is because we do have transit assets in the train stations. They're not utilized right now, but they
We've got
could
an
be.
activity center.
It could be created in activity center. We
But
could
that's what
add it.
I kind of think
Yeah.
at 10%. It's really, as you said, it's where you have the jobs, the services, the sewer,
Yeah,
the water, so you're now sort of overweight, well, maybe not, maybe it ends up being 50-50.
I think it all washes out. I think you get the same results.
so you'll see. We got the maps. We're getting there. The reason we pulled transit out was mostly, and it's such a small percentage, is because it was mostly just a nod to, we think this is important enough to call out by
It may
itself.
change over time.
Yeah.
Well, the state of Connecticut thinks it's important. Their transit-oriented development is
Right.
the
Yeah.
buzzword.
Yeah.
Top.
Yeah.
Except for here.
Well, and we're working currently on our transit-oriented development plan too. That's, doing soft site analysis and things at those transit stations to try and build transit-oriented development. So it could go hand in hand. It's not something we've seen yet, and maybe, if it feels to the group as we go through, like that's something that should be merged in with activity centers, we could do that and reevaluate as time goes to see if next iteration, we want to pull it out as something.
It might not come state legitimacy without it, though.
Yeah,
Right.
Does the sewer component, consider capacity for growth,
No,
no,
just existence?
just
where it
existing.
is, which to some extent does, because you're not gonna just build a new system elsewhere. It's gonna stem off of the existing system in most cases,
Actually, I was thinking downstream. So
so,
experience at the shoreline is it's all gotta go to London.
okay. Oh, as to where
So
it
you've
needs
got,
to
your
go.
bottleneck is not necessarily at the origin, it's
It's
downstream
where it's
at the
going.
treatment plant.
Got it, okay.
And that could be meaningful because the existence of a sewer somewhere doesn't mean that it's gonna
That it's
have any capacity. to accommodate
available to
growth.
expand.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. No, that's a good point.
So, first table, population, 50%. So 50% of the 7,548 units is 3,774 units. So you've got your existing population, the percent of the region's population that you have, and then what your allocation would be in proportion to that. And you will get this, so you can take it home with you. Transit, here's the stations that we selected, it's 189 units for a total of 755 of the total units. So it's small potatoes in terms of the grand scheme. It's, like I said, it's more of like a nod to, we feel this is important to have its own category. And then Kevin?
Yeah.
So this.
I can click you through too.
No, yeah, no, this is just the breakdown to show you the different layers that go into this. The first one being the jobs layer, and that's on a scale of concentration per square mile. Just broken down into natural breaks of 5 categories, so it's not necessarily focusing in on specifically how many jobs are in any one region. It's how concentrated are they, where are the jobs? And that kind of gets into the whole where you live, where you commute kind of factor. The second one, services and amenities, that was a large, what's that? I think it's like 178 points, once we pushed everything together. And that's your urgent care centers, your primary care facilities, your pediatric care facilities, your schools, grocery stores, town halls. I have a full Excel list of what we chose to include in this that we can provide. If you want to search through that and scrutinize it, please do. Cause we pulled from the state and from our own plans and kind of cobbled it together. And then what you're looking at there is just a heat map. That is, it's not taking any factors such as size of the particular amenity. It's solely what's near what. So it's based on concentration of density of locations. So we didn't weight grocery stores any higher. We didn't weight medical facilities any higher. We didn't take into account like a small grocery store versus a large grocery store, that kind of scenario. So we're not singling anything out. We're just saying, where is the highest concentration of stuff that we care about? So that's what that middle one is, and it's low to high concentration. And then
That
certain.
doesn't include restaurants and retail.
No,
Yeah,
no,
right.
so to try to
Yep.
avoid the doubling up because jobs are also businesses. We tried to keep that separate, we realized that they're, like, for instance, the hospital, for instance, it's a big employer. So that would count, but it's an essential service.
Yeah.
So, so those two, and then the last one, water and sewer, is just a straight up where is the service available? And it's where the pipes are in the ground with an applied buffer to say that it reaches a certain amount of properties. It's not 100% accurate, but it's a general layout of where you have the ability to, say, tie in or that already has said service. And what you're looking at there is the overlap. So the gray area has both water and sewer, whereas the maroon area is water or sewer, and we treated those as the same. So.
Line's 100% accurate.
Yeah.
Easiest process.
That was an easy one, yes. So, we are aware that there has been improvements to Old Lyme specifically. In the southwest corner or southeast corner there. I do not have a digital update of those improvements,
Improvements to
the sewer system.
proposed
Oh, it's all proposed,
and
okay.
and unfunded.
That would be why I keep hitting dead ends, cause I asked the GIS people and I poked the town and the town didn't even get back to me, so they probably think I'm crazy.
Yeah, and part of the long process has been to negotiate capacity down, so that's why
Capacity downstream, yeah.
we're seeing that firsthand.
So,
I'll give you another quick anecdote. There was a proposal to build a pretty sizable 830G apartment building up on Hatchett's Hill Road,
mhm,
and the developer tried to negotiate for capacity for sewer because the sewer hookup to East Lyme is right, it was
It's
literally
right there,
across the street.
can't do it.
Can't do it.
Well,
Some-
East Line, not a part of our cog, but they are at the point now where they can't develop anymore because there's a proposed subdivision that was years ago that they got the approval and they got assigned that level of sewer services.
Right.
So many gallons a day or a month, whatever.
Mhm.
And that hasn't been built, but that's allocated off the
Already
board.
there,
So they're at capacity.
got it.
Not to belabor, it, but
Oh, yeah.
it might be worth looking at the treatment plants and seeing what
What
capacity they're at, and then maybe factoring that into
can they
the
expand?
the sewer component.
Yeah, both sides go. Capacity for water is a little different.
Yeah, so I was trying to understand. So Deep River, we have a plant and we treat, or for the water, we treat Chester and Essex.
Right,
But it looks, I was trying to see the gray only goes just over the borders, is that right? The rest is just water?
oh, it could be either or.
Other,
So those could be wells that have sewer, or they could be water that doesn't have sewer. I think in that case, it's probably all sewer with well water,
okay.
I'm assuming. So,
Yeah, that's what we talked about that. I
Yeah,
was like,
I
does that happen?
yeah, it does, because, well, sewer is gravity feed. It doesn't necessarily need city water to function. And if you have a well with enough flow, your sewer will still work as long as it's going downhill.
Chester has both this plain water in certain sections only, and then sewer and water in other sections.
In other sections, so,
The caveat with all of this is, even the points that we have are still being massaged. So you won't, if we don't change the inputs, you won't see a ton of movement as we work out kinks in what we've put in here, right? I'm
Right.
saying that right?
yeah, any one factor doesn't move it adjusts the numbers slightly, but it's everything together, considering that they're all, in this case, they're all weighted the same. So, a high density job area is weighed the exact same as a high concentration amenity area is weighed the same as a high concentration water availability area. We didn't split hairs there and try to factor in, well, this is worth this much, this is worth that much. It's just straight across the board.
So we smushed it together. We call this the smoosh map.
That's nice.
The technical
So
term.
this is all 3 layers, relativized down to a 1 to 5 point scale, and then essentially just stacked on top of each other. And then you get a point system that is ostensibly from 0 to 15, which is what you're looking at here. It has more gradation to it. But where the factors that we deemed were important all end up at the same time. That's what you're looking at on this map, is where do the factors that we considered important most concentrated?
Yeah, I wish we fulfilled even what you have on there, but look, it looks like you tagged the businesses that are in a little industrial park by the quarry, which is surrounded by horse farms. And there aren't a whole lot of people that actually work in that I mean, it is a real business, I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
there's a transfer station for trash and that, so, yeah, I wish we had that much more space.
Right.
I don't even think we're at that 3.4, unfortunately.
And then-
Yeah, and so this is all 100% adjustable based on what you think the scenario is.
Well, our opportunity zone is that sewer line.
Is that
That's why I
sewer
was
line.
I was curious on that slide.
Exactly, yeah. So the jobs do extend some of the opportunity out a little farther.
But that doesn't count as much,
But
right?
yeah, it's only one piece of the puzzle, and
Right.
specifically jobs was on a 1 to 5 scale. So if there's only a few jobs, you still made the map, but
It's not adding much.
you're not showing that much. It's not adding much to your
One of
allocation.
our developer speakers that you brought to us, I remember him saying that how, when they do their chart, when they're figuring out how important sewers are versus just,
Yeah.
you know, like if they have to build it themselves. And
Yeah.
So there would be a case for adjusting the point scale that I use now based on capacity and other factors. And that's the kind of stuff we want everybody to go home, do your homework.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
come back and say, well, we really need to consider this, or we really need to consider that, and then adjust it accordingly.
So the number we're all waiting for.
Yes,
So when you put all of those together, the column all the way to the right is the total allocation for each municipality.
oh, yay.
When you add
Over 10 years.
over 10 years.
Yeah.
But then that breakdown, that's sort of our 10% number in line. I mean,
So-
we've got, we've got like 1,100 housing units.
Mhm.
And when the state says, well, you need 10% of that to be affordable housing, that looks a lot like that 114.
So, you know, it's really funny. We noticed that too. The numbers look very similar, but the biggest difference is they're talking only affordable housing. We are talking 30, 50, 80, and 100% AMI. So we're talking your total housing supply where, you know, each
interesting.
AMI category is only a percentage of that. So we're looking at the whole housing market, same number of units, but some of them would be market rate, some of them would not be, you know, some would be NOAA, they would be all different categories. That's the biggest difference, I think.
Because I think the thing that's missing from here are the existing number of houses. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, if I go back, it's like 1,700 for, the population is 3,700, but the number of houses is like 1,700, which is your 10%. I mean, sort of, that would be interesting too, to see how
Right.
many housing units you currently have.
You already have, oh, well, actually, we should
We
be
could
able to
add that.
find that.
And once you overlay the AMI, then
So-
the AMI stats on the existing inventory,
Mhm.
Yeah,
you're gonna see a mismatch.
yeah, exactly.
You're
Yeah.
also gonna see a mismatch. You're projecting, your growth projections.
Mhm.
Right.
I actually had my zoning official do the work based on what we were hearing our fair share was gonna be, which was gonna be about 240 units,
Wow.
roughly half of what,
Yeah.
that is.
Mhm.
But 240 housing units in line was 40 years worth of growth. Right.
Yeah.
That was 40 years worth
Yeah.
of growth,
Yeah.
and most of that growth happened 20 years ago.
Yeah,
I mean, if you look at it, we've been slowing and slowing and slowing.
yeah,
And all, so that might be 114 extra housing units in line, might be 40 years of growth.
yeah,
Sure.
and you know, that's fair because we're projecting a 1% growth model, which is not likely to happen,
Right.
right?
With the population in the red box, as opposed, is that unit or?
So that's your allocate, so those are the three allocation categories, one by population, two by.
Based on population,
Yes.
but it's a unit, 94
Yeah.
units.
Right,
Based on.
Right, based on
right.
population,
Okay.
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to put your existing population and your percent of the region just for comparison,
And again, we haven't introduced any demographics,
not yet.
right, right. So, I mean, I'm the youngest person in my neighborhood, and like the next age group is, the next up is 70, and then a lot of my neighbors are, I mean, that's how we bought our house.
Yeah,
Right.
You know, is, it came time, and all the other houses are neighborhood coming time, so I'd be curious to see what the
well,
demographic is on there.
we do have that information, we did that kind of profile in our regional housing plan, it's
I wanna see that,
2020
I wanna
data.
see that as heat map. that's
Yeah,
all.
yeah. You know, and we're working on getting all of that updated for the data dashboard as well, over time. And we do have age category breakdowns. We don't have it on a heat map, but we do have the age category breakdowns on the data dashboard right now for all the municipalities. So yeah, that is perfectly valid. We're projecting a 1% population growth, which is extremely optimistic.
Mhm.
The other thing to remember,
Maybe.
What percentage of that are people low mod income
right,
that want to or can move here?
exactly,
And then even to make it more confusing, if you retire, you're making, six figures, and you retire, you may jump down to low mod income, but
Mm.
you've been saving your whole life and
Right.
you are well off.
right,
Right.
So are you in that low mod income then?
right,
And now you're competing with someone who's younger and has no assets.
Yeah.
Like in Essex, I mean, I know 3 people who just moved to the other side and bought smaller homes.
Yeah.
Well, they're taking affordable housing from a new family coming.
right, yeah, yeah.
And I think everybody's got that dynamic going on.
So I think,
That's the problem. I'm not saying it's.
So that's what
Yeah,
the polling
great.
talks about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's.
People aren't giving up, they've grown past what they have, but they keep it, because it's working and it's cheap.
right,
Or they
Well, that
downsize.
person now
Right.
counted as a
Yeah.
low mod income person
right,
in the next census because their salary,
They
I mean,
are.
their income is lower.
right,
They do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
They don't
because
count
we're-
your assets.
yeah,
That's-
they're not.
So that they would be lumped into that number.
And that does a lot for our region because we have a
Yeah.
lot of retirees that don't have an income.
But no diversity.
Mm,
You're just moving across the street.
yeah,
Yeah.
so, I mean,
Sorry to put it that way. but-
No, that's just one of the many other confounding factors that make this whole puzzle really hard to solve.
yeah,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I don't envy.
Another thing to keep in mind is this is not, the purpose of this is not to say you must turn around and build X number of
No.
units. The purpose of this is to understand, we're trying to do an exercise where we're seeing in terms of future comprehensive planning purposes. If this scenario were to happen, this mix would create a healthy housing market in alignment with the vision in the plan of conservation and development. And this is what we should be targeting.
Right.
But it's not, so it's like making sure that regulations and planning documents reflect the capacity to account for this. Not to say that all of this development needs to be built or that all of this development is gonna come in. It's more a planning exercise.
I would
I
say
wanna know we can do or
monitoring
not.
too,
Yeah, monitoring, absolutely.
Right.
Checking in and
Seeing how this
seeing.
changes
seeing
over
what
time.
reality.
Cause
Yes.
it is it's kind of an answer to the problems. Maybe not the right answer, cause we don't know if there's a right answer, but it's kind of an answer to some of those demographic issues and housing market issues that Dawn brought up, right? If we can plan for this number of units in a particular AMI mix across our region in strategic locations, close to jobs, close to transit, close to the stuff. And simultaneously, because housing isn't in a vacuum, we also have to look at our economic development. We also have to look at our transit access. Not one of these things on its own is going to fix our problem,
Mm.
right? But it is a step, it's a piece of the puzzle. If we can plan for this while simultaneously doing the other bits, we might be able to turn around some of the problems in the market, some of the problems with our demographic trajectory. That's the optimistic.
Yeah,
Does anyone want a cookie?
No, it's a good, it's a good tool. I just, I mean, I agree. Normally you put 198. Deep River, if you build a tower. I mean, they just aren't gonna, we just don't.
And you look at Chester.
Well, the other-
Chester's that,
Well, I mean, let's be.
they're not gonna like that.
Actually, you don't work here, we got stuff.
That's all right.
Yes, and your point, to overlay this with what Don was telling us, and you look at it through the lens of, we need multifamily and we need rentals,
All right, all right.
okay? Then it starts to,
Yeah, and it also assumes redevelopment potential. You know, it assumes that properties that are built currently are not set in stone. Something could be demoed and something new could be put up. We're looking at 10 years, properties turn over all the time.
I mean, the heat map is great, it shows where the jobs are, and I think the outlook, at least I know in our community, in Essex, you know, there is even contention between, like, is it families? Or is it gonna be the new villages, you know, or, you know, the retirement community, and those are possibly very different plans.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's both and.
Yeah, well, that's what Don showed us last week, half of rentals are single person, you know, it kind of blew my mind.
Right,
But that's a whole different, we're making those units in population. If it's a bunch of rentals with one person versus 10 family homes,
right.
which again, I don't know where we put them, that's it, we want.
Yeah, where do you?
Right.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah,
To me, the win-win I always come up with is preservation. It's, you know, you go, well, across the street almost, where they did the witch hazel,
mhm,
or up the street where they repurposed stuff.
yeah,
And typically it'll be affordable housing.
yeah,
So you know, the state's happy, this town's happy because they're diversifying, and there's also getting something back on the tax bill,
yeah.
you know, for the town, tax revenue versus vacant, abandoned stuff.
Mhm.
And it looks better, but I mean, I wish we could highlight that in this area, because it's so hard to build the land around septic and all these barricades.
That's a
That's
great.
one way to do it. That's one way to get something going.
And it's something that's existing, so when we're talking about buildable land, converting, you know, adaptive reuse of existing facilities is one way to create more units to address this without
Right.
needing more buildable land, because it's land that's already built on,
Right.
right?
And Chester just passed the regulation for
Mhm.
repurposing.
Yeah, and same thing with, you know, we've talked about it here. I don't think we really came to a resolution on it, but something, once we're done with this effort, we can continue to look at is converting large, single-family homes into multiple units. And then that's also making use of existing built land. You don't need more buildable land, but you could double or triple the number of units on that property. So, you know, it's not something that again, we don't want to get into that at the regional level, saying this is how you must plan for these units. But what we could do is, once we come up with our formula and we like it, we can start talking more about our toolkit items and our strategies for increasing supply of housing in different ways that can accommodate, you know, a smaller amount of greenfield site or buildable land, which, according to our regional plan of conservation and development, we would really prefer not to touch anyways. You know, we would prefer to leave the open space as open. We would prefer to not develop on greenfield sites if at all possible, and make use of already developed areas and infill. So we're not here to dictate how towns do that, but we are here to help towns do the best that they can. So this is the equity, this is the last bit. We haven't done the full calculation on this, but here's the plan. So this is the breakdown by AMI from the CHAS data that HUD uses. And it's what was used in our case study examples. And basically what we were thinking we would do is use this percentage breakdown as kind of our break-even point. If you as a town are above or below wherever this is, we would adjust your share in that category to make it higher or lower to line up with the regional average. So for example, I looked at all the town data. I think it was Durham had an outrageously high percentage of units in the over 100% AMI category.
Wow.
Like outrageously high. I think they had like 75% over 100% AMI.
What was why?
I don't recall. That, it was not as outrageous as that. That one particularly stood out, because I think it was the farthest off the mark of anything else I saw. So they would get an adjustment down, and their allocations in other categories would go up accordingly. So that's kind of the idea. And then the questions, did we get the right input categories for our maps? Are our categories both in the maps and in the allocation breakdown weighted appropriately, that 50, 10, and 40%? Does the equity adjustment make sense as I just presented it in 2 seconds? And again, we don't need to come to a consensus on all of this today, but these are things that we need to nail down before we can lock in what we're doing with this exercise.
I got a quick thought on the AMI thing.
Yeah.
So if you're basing it on current AMIs, so there's an implicit assumption in that that's desirable. If you're gonna, and if you're gonna try to correct to that, I think we need to consider the fact that the current state might not be the ideal state.
For the region as a whole.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that occurred to me, and that's why I brought in the state as well. The state might not be desirable either, but the
Right.
state is very close to the region. And I would hesitate without something else to relate ourselves to make up what we feel is the ideal. If that makes sense.
Right.
So if you have an example of a place that has a good breakdown of what appropriate AMI categories would be, at this point, I'm thinking using the region as the baseline is at the very least redistributing across the region. But that point is well taken. The region might not be great. The region is close to the state might not be great either. At least if we are redistributing AMI categories within the region, we are equalizing, say, Middletown with Durham. That's the thought process.
I think it makes sense.
Thank you.
It's the only way to really approach it, short of arbitrarily saying, we want this many at this percentage. I don't think there is a measurement available that allows you to say, aside from the breakdown as it is right now, what your goal
Right,
is.
like this is the ideal utopian situation.
There is no goal for how many households we want at 30%. Obviously, we'd prefer there to be less and
Yeah,
for
but
them to make more
isn't
money.
that exactly what that town allocation requirement is?
So, yeah, I mean, 10%, yeah, but
Yeah.
that's arbitrary.
Yeah, and we frequently rail against that.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think we're all on the same page as looking at solutions, but
Yeah.
it's not arbitrary if somebody comes with 830G. If you're at
So-
9.5, you're gonna
Right.
put it there. If you're at 11, you can say, hey.
So
you know,
at this
Yeah.
point,
can I exercise
Right,
it?
but the creation of the 10% is arbitrary, I think you meant, like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Decided.
No, that's
as
definitely-
10%.
that's just
Yeah.
plucked out of the air and it's like, good luck.
But
See if you can meet that.
we're saying 12% is good at less than 30%
Yeah,
AMI.
This is just a regional average, so assuming that across the region, an average of 12% of the population is in that category. Reasonably speaking, 12% of the housing stock should be reflecting that ability to live.
This goes back to that Washington model that was very obnoxious when we had, you could either do, everyone gets the same percentage or everyone gets the same proportion of a percentage.
What isn't necessarily reflected in that is that evenly spread? And maybe that's where we go a step too far, because there might, well, for instance, there definitely is a higher proportion of those income brackets in, say, a Middletown. And does that necessarily mean that Old Lyme needs to have the same percentage breakdown to be fair?
And if you're having
I don't know.
services to help that
Right,
population
yeah.
and they're in line, it's gonna be a little harder to.
Yeah.
Well, we talk about that all the time. It's like, let's say we did suddenly, Scotty beam down our 10%. There's no transportation,
There's a lot of
there's
stuff
no
missing,
social
like-
services.
You could place them somewhere, but
Yeah.
it won't work for them necessarily.
I would also like to interject in that conversation, that just because someone's at 30% AMI doesn't, I mean, that, in this region, that doesn't necessarily mean they need transportation and need services.
Right, they might be,
That could be,
I don't know what that actually comes out to as an
Not
annual
much.
income, but
But
they
Huh.
might be
There-
okay, cause our AMI is like in the
Pretty high.
100,000s,
Yeah.
so.
I hate to interject this as an option because it would be so much work.
But the assumption behind leveling the playing field is that the equity question is not so much about how much you make, but it's, do you have a choice of where you want to live?
Yeah. Exactly.
So is there a house for your income bracket available across the region, or is it not? And the equity question is, do you want to accommodate for that and adjust your town's housing stock to allow for that maneuverability?
That was really well said.
Yeah,
I
that's pretty
know.
good.
We're putting that in a report.
Yeah. Send it. The thing I was gonna offer is, Traffa talked about this, using the CHAS data, you can calculate how many cost burdened households you have in each of those income categories in your town. And you can calculate what share of the units that are available to them are being taken up by people at a higher income bracket, and use that to calculate how many extra units in each bracket you need. And we could use that breakdown to
So
do this
you said you had
allocation.
Chase data. Do you have, is there any way to find out how many of those homes, right, at that percentage, like the higher demographic, are reverse mortgage?
You know?
We have a home, 3 houses away from me, very desirable. And what's gonna happen to it is, you know, the occupant reverse mortgage. And then they passed, and then it ended up going to HUD, and it's been vacant for 5 years. It's on a lake. I live on a lake. It's very desirable. The
Wow.
only person who's gonna buy it because no one's been tending to the roof and no one's been tending to the weather and the icy roads. I mean, it's crazy. It's a beautiful home that somebody built with love at one time. But what's gonna happen is the developer's gonna buy it because it's gonna need so much work when it's finally released. But there's, I'm curious with the high percentage of, people in that age bracket, what the reverse mortgage is and how that would affect the overall, inventory.
How could we find that?
That's a confounding factor.
Ask Chapa.
No,
Do
I'm
they
so,
know?
somebody has it. That's what I'm
Somebody's got
curious.
it, so data.
Yeah. it
Yeah.
seems good.
You can find out where everything is, at every, location you can find.
I'd be curious to see, yeah, what the outlay of that looks like,
I would bet in my community that there's a high percentage
high percentage.
of that.
Really?
A lot, it's, yeah,
I know there's a lot of people.
it's a lot of old people.
I haven't,
Well, I know, I mean, some of my neighbors, I know that they're, as you described,
Mhm.
that they're able, you know, that they're retired. But I know also some of them were school teachers, so they're certainly, you know, whatever the savings are, that's not how they're paying the
God forbid
taxes.
they live a long time, right?
Well, it's a, you know,
You're all equity.
it's actually a common, conversation around my neighbors. It's like, yeah, life's going great, damn, you know, it's like, I didn't, you know, I think I'd go this far, you know? It's kind of a conundrum.
So this was the time we thought we would be done-ish with the conversation, so we did pretty good.
Yeah.
But on the next step slide.
I'm gonna email everyone here the questions that are still open. the
And this deck, right?
presentation,
Yes.
Please.
Yeah,
I filled up my note space now, it doesn't make sense.
anyone online, do you wanna, ask a question, make a comment? Have a cookie? Oh wait, you can't because you're online.
Oh, that was cool.
That was amazing. They all walked away. They're not actually there.
I know, just
Except
Eric.
for Eric. Thank you, Eric.
Oh,
Hey,
there's
there.
Good.
I don't have, the only comment I have is kudos to the staff at RiverCog, everybody that put all this work in. I think really what you're really teasing out, I think the nuts and bolts of when we talk about there being a need for additional housing units. And I think that sitting in here in the questioning, listen to what everyone's got to say. You guys are obviously all, you know, really invested in this. But I think what you're all working on, Megan, and, you know, thanks to your leadership, is getting to an idea of like a goal number. I can tell you firsthand, I don't think the state of Connecticut will ever be able to align its development patterns with the need and be able to adjust. Like, so, we're never going to get to a space where you said, "Whoopsies, we built 20,000 units and we only needed 10,000." We're just not building at that rate. I don't think it's really even physically possible, given all the parameters. So, but what you're gathering is a concrete number that I think is some really realistic, fact-based, database goals for municipalities to shoot for. So, congratulations to getting to this point. I look forward to continuing watching it. And obviously, if there's space for us to help in any capacity, feel free to use me as a point of contact at the agency. And like I said, just keep up the good work. And it's been really interesting to listen along.
Thanks, Ben.
I think we'll be reaching out to Ben in our near future in Deep River as the thought of building out an affordable housing committee.
All right.
Looks like it's coming to fruition, so stay tuned, Ben.
And you're gonna chair it, right?
Always looking for volunteers. No, seriously though, I got an opportunity to meet with another municipality. I met with Chester earlier this month, or maybe that was the last one, not even sure at this point. Time's flying by. But yeah, like I said, if you have any questions, y'all know how to get a hold of me. And if you can't find me, tell Megan, and Megan can yell at me and I'll be quick to respond. So
I can-
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks for joining us on these, Ben. We appreciate it. So I guess I can run through the next steps for this. I kind of talked about them already, but before everyone starts dropping off, take the month, well, not the whole month, take until October 11th to think about this. Send us your additional thoughts, responses to the questions that OS is going to send out. We've got notes from today and a recording that we will take notes from for today. And we'll compile all of that and we'll put all the questions back up in October and we'll hash it out. And we'll come to a consensus based on what we've heard from you and what we talked about today. After the October meeting, once we have a consensus on all those open questions, we'll rerun our models. And we will present that to you in a very similar format to this, although probably slightly abridged at the November meeting. And if everyone is happy at the November meeting, which I sincerely hope everyone is, then we will have a full report to present to you for the December meeting. In a hard copy with pretty graphics. Yeah. We'll wrap it with a bow, give it to you with the Christmas cookies. It'll be Merry Christmas for everybody.
Go forth and share.
Yes, go forth and share.
Right.
And outstanding questions about the process, about what we talked about.
I still am questioning the population versus the existing housing units. Do we have that in this?
Yeah,
It is there.
yeah. So that was
Is that the vacant, no, what is that, the 0.2?
the existing units. Here, let me see if I go back. Who's at the top?
Yeah, that's half of the total.
Total, okay,
Yeah.
yep.
Yep.
Divided by 2,
So-
okay.
So in a sense, that's addressing current need. Because that's the current population. And the current, how many houses you have, and you already are at a deficit.
And that's
Right.
because we are estimating the household size
And
level.
that's a conundrum for Chester and Deep River in Essex, in that, we want to attract families for the schools, right? But people want to go to schools that are already, it's like we're going in the wrong direction to attract people, but we need to attract people to go in the right direction.
Yeah, it's true. And we basically, that's why we had Dawn give us a high and a low estimate in our housing market study. It was a much lower estimate if we kept on our current trajectory. And he said, well, what if we start building units? Can we turn this trajectory
I feel I
around?
need to watch, I've watched it 2 times on YouTube. Thank you so much for putting it up there, and I gave it to all of our committee members. I'm like, you have to watch this, there are insights. But I need to watch it, but I have to say, overall, it ends up being kind of frustrating,
Yeah,
you know?
it is.
Well, what was this, that presentation that we had?
So
The
we
dog
have
pulling
two,
one from,
Yeah.
yeah,
Where
we-
do I find that?
it's on our YouTube channel. I can send you a link.
and we
It's
also,
in the
Can you send me a link also?
I think it was in the minutes. Oh,
Yeah,
You
it should be
probably
in the
did,
minutes.
but I don't-
Yeah.
you put the link to the co-pilot to get the slides. And that was problematic,
Oh, it didn't work?
as I understand. It didn't work for me, but I was like, well, maybe it'll work for somebody else. I got the video right here. But then somebody else said they were having issues, and I said, oh, I'll mention it. I totally forgot.
Okay.
so there's two Don Pullen presentations, there's the one he gave for this committee, and then there's the one that he gave when we did our regional housing plan. And that one is, that's on our YouTube channel too,
Yeah,
right?
you-
That-
It should be.
It's on our website.
I could have sworn it was.
I also saw a third Don Pullen presentation that was amazing, not affiliated with Rivercog, where he did the demographic thing, but it really focused on, our affordable housing units bringing too many children and how to combat that belief.
This
that
guy's like
it's
a
gonna,
TED
like,
Talk,
wreck
this
our
guy.
children.
It's like,
Right?
that's why I've watched a couple times. It's like a fire hose of information. You know, he's just spitting out
Yeah.
data, and this is why this is this. And you're like, wow.
And he has very graciously offered to kind of be our phone a friend on this process.
Nice.
That's very gracious.
Yeah. He's a good friend of the COG and,
He seems to have a very, he groks this in a way of like, well, yeah, you can do this, but then it's gonna ripple across that way. And that's, as we keep going back to, that's the hardest part of the nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, but this looks like an easy fix, except not everybody's this, and not
Yeah.
everybody's that, and not, you know.
I think that's the only way you're gonna get your 183 minutes
yeah.
in Chester, is thinking about 1 and 2 unit housing. There's no way they're gonna put in 2 houses in Chester.
You know what, though, you're halfway there,
So you gotta, you really have
right?
to think about what he said, and it is like the affordable housing, project that's in the courts right now. I mean, that would have gotten us at least a quarter of the way there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's, yeah, if we could do something with the deed restrictions on the current NOAAs, even with some kind of tax abatement or whatever, that would, there'd be a lot of healing with that across the whole region.
You're not gonna get, in line, we're not gonna get anybody to sign a 10-year deed restriction.
I'm curious about that, because
we
again, going to
said
people to
that.
reverse mortgage and all that, that's why I have to say, be transparent, the reason I wanna know what those numbers are is I'm wondering what percentage of the population, because they just all marched to the meeting on Thursday, what do we need to do? And basically, you need to say that your home is only gonna be worth this, because you've already paid for it, you're not buying another one. You know, maybe you're not thinking of cashing it into whatever, I'd be wondering how many people would be willing to bite,
To make
Yeah.
that,
you know? That's like ensuring your community is.
We did a survey a few years back.
You see?
We surveyed where our NOAA was, and we sent out feelers to every one of them and said, would you be willing, this was back when it was only a year. This was only when it was, the deed restriction was only a year, and we got 0.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to be fair, and this is what I referred to everybody marching in the other day, is like now, you know, before it was hypothetical. You know, that's happening in Chester, that's happening in Essex. Nobody's gonna be doing that in Deep River, there's no buildable land. And well, now something is gonna be happening in Deep River, and so now, you know, a lot of people can say no to a hypothetical, all kinds of things until it's put in their face.
And then they say no.
right.
And then they still say no, you're right, it's cognitive
They
dissonance.
definitely say no.
Cognitive dissonance is a real thing.
Once we figure out that we are happy with the numbers that we spit out, because we know we're estimating a bit high right now. Once we feel happy with it, then we can start talking strategy, right? Like and that's the idea of having a target number and an idea of mix, as you say. Because then you can start strategizing what levers you need to pull to get different types of housing, to get your mix right. Do you need 10 unit buildings and, 22 unit buildings and so on and so forth?
Oh,
And then
that-
you
that
make
was-
sure,
Pat just said she had to, she already dropped. Okay.
and then, you can cobble that together and make sure your zoning, because you're not saying they all have to be built. You're just saying my zoning regulations would allow for this mixture to be built somewhere. And then when a developer comes, you're like, here's what we have where you can build these things.
Well, that in itself, would that allow you to get a certificate for moratorium to show that you're
Probably not.
working?
Probably not, no,
Working towards doesn't count.
no.
So,
Well, it used to.
Yeah.
It used to, that was the whole purpose of the certificate, is you had a moratorium, but you had to prove that you were providing that. Couldn't just say, yeah, we're working on it.
And the final number is that guiding factor, but it's also a fluid number.
Yeah.
It's not set in stone. It's not an order, you must build this many, or it's nothing of that sort. In fact, I would argue that like the inputs, the equation, getting that right, so that 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, you could plug in newer, better data and see how that's moved.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we want to be able to do with this, is actually track it over time and see, okay, were our predictions right, or do we need to course adjust?
And at some point, we may feel that our priorities are different and the equation may need to change.
Mhm.
Or it's not getting to the right mix that we thought it was,
Right.
right? So it's very fluid, but
It's going to be the communication and the convincing.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
People don't wanna change.
yeah,
If you're fine, you're fine.
Right.
Right.
I think that's where Dawn is really great at, like, making the case for why status quo isn't really an option, because it's
Right.
not gonna stay the way it is, it's gonna get worse. It's either gonna get worse or it's gonna get better, but it's not just gonna stay put.
Are we still recording?
We
Yeah,
are. We can
We were
adjourn
waiting
if you
for-
guys wanna if someone wants to make a motion to adjourn.
Cat's gone too, we've lost, we don't.
Yeah, I think as staff we can do that though, right?
Can we?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, we don't have a quorum. We
So it
you're
doesn't
leaving.
matter.
Yeah.
We never call
We're
the meeting to
adjourned.
order.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, thanks for.